Yes, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. It is I, Bruce Hope, back with another episode of the Format Podcast. And it's August, so you know what that means. Football is right around the corner. And if you love college football, you will love this episode. Joining me today to discuss all things college football is a regular to the podcast now, is Notre Dame football beat writer for the Athletic, Pete Sampson. And also joining us to talk SEC and the monster moves that it's making that is shaking up the college football world, our writer for SI operated allgators.com, as well as co-host of the Locked On Gators football podcast, Zach Goodall. So that's going to be a great one. If you love college football, make sure you tune in. But before we get to that, you know what we got to do. Let's knock out the particulars. So first and foremost, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for joining me. Do me a favor, click that subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen. Also, when you're done that, click the bell so you can be notified when new content comes up. Also, after you watch the show, if you like it, click the thumbs up for me. If you don't like it, don't. Too easy, right? Okay, if you're on social media, if you're on Twitter, you can find me at Bruce F.A. Hope. That's at Bruce F.A. Hope. If you're on Instagram, the address is at the Format Podcast, at the Format Podcast. If you want to email me directly, you can email the Format Podcast at outlook.com, the Format Podcast at outlook.com. You could tell me, Bruce, you're an idiot. You don't know anything about college football. You don't know anything about sports. You're the dumbest dude I ever heard talking sports. You could tell me, Bruce, you're a genius. I love what you kicking. You make a lot of sense. You fight the narratives and you kick the truth. I would love it if you did that. But that's cool because no matter what you say, guess what? If you give me that feedback, it lets me know you're listening. All right. If you want to mention topics that I may have missed that you'd love to hear me discuss, go ahead and shoot me those. I will do my best to get to them and address them in a subsequent episode. All right. So yeah, make sure you hit me on social media. Make sure you email me directly. You can do all that. I'm pretty responsive. I would love to hear your feedback. All right. Lets me know you're listening. Also, if you want to hear the audio podcast, pretty much anywhere you listen to audio podcasts, I'm available. Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, all that. Wherever you might listen, Anchor, iHeartRadio. If you want to listen, I'm there. Just search the Format Podcast, and I should come right up. And by the way, if you're listening on Apple Podcast, go ahead and give me that 5 star, 5 star, 5 star, 5 star, 5 star rating. I appreciate it. It helps us rise in the rankings. Also, leave a comment. Tell me you like it. All right, that's cool. So anyway, got all that out of the way. You know what time it is now. Sit back, relax, and listen up to episode 102 of the Format. So here we are. Fall's in the air, and well, depending on where you live, I guess, right? Probably more so for Pete than Zach and I, but we know what that means. That means college football. So here to join me and talk some good college football are two guys who really have their finger on the pulse of the sport. Pete Sampson, beat writer for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at The Athletic, and Zach Goodall, who writes for SI-operated allgators.com and is host of the Locked On Gators podcast. Thanks so much for joining me tonight, guys.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Good to be with you, Bruce.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Bruce.
Definitely. So let's get right to it, guys. We know what the biggest story entering this college football season is, and that's the expansion of the Southeastern Conference, which most people regard as the best conference in college football. if it wasn't before, it probably is now, and who knows where that's going to go. You got Texas and Oklahoma who've gotten their official invites. So let's start with you, Zach. You're our resident SEC guy. What are you hearing first about how schools in the conference really feel about it, especially Florida, with what OU did to them in the Cotton Bowl last year?
Well, for Florida, I don't know if they're too concerned about the Cotton Bowl specifically. They had a ton of players out in that game. Dan Mullen, as childish as it was for him to say, said that they pretty much sent their JV team out there. But all of that aside, I guess that is a kickstart to this rivalry that is now going to officially be a thing. And I think Florida, for one, I mean, that's the school I'm most in tune with. They are excited about it. Mullen in particular has kind of spoken out against the weaker schedule, as in the 2 or 3 throw games they'll have a year, wants to go across the conference a bit more, and he wants a lot more competition, in which case Oklahoma and Texas on their good days, I guess, are that type of competition that he's looking for. And they view it as the same thing in recruiting. Having these 2 powerhouse schools within the conference should only make recruiting greater for the conference as a whole. And the one thing that, they won't tell you, but everyone's thinking about is all the money that's going to be coming in from this as well. So, at least from Florida's perspective, they seem really on board. It really felt like a lot of schools were on board across the entire conference other than maybe Texas A&M. But the votes speak for themselves. It was 14-0, and Texas A&M came around on it.
Got it. So, we saw Oklahoma dominate the Big 12 for pretty much most of the past 2 decades. How close is Oklahoma to being an actual top contender in the SEC when it arrives? I've heard people say that, let's say they were to arrive next season. If that was the case, obviously not. But if that was the case, they'd be maybe the 4th best team in the conference. So where are you on that, Zach?
I guess because it's so early, I've not even thought about how to rank them. I think that they're not far off, though. I mean, we've seen in the past couple of years, Oklahoma improve defensively. Big 12 teams as a whole starting to improve defensively compared to what they were even just 5 years ago. And, Lincoln Riley and the Sooners offense and any quarterback they put back there can put up points. That's never going to be a problem, even in the SEC with tougher defenses than they faced before. It's going to be how quickly can these defenses get up to speed with the SEC. And that will be a challenge. Even coming in, if they've got a good defense, it's still going to take time to get used to the physicality that the SEC brings to the table. That being said, we've seen an upward trajectory from Oklahoma at this point. It's safe to assume that as they continue to recruit, especially at an SEC level, not that they don't recruit well enough as is, but once they have those additional resources to them, it shouldn't be too long of a turnaround before they're up there competing with, assuming they're in the West, it's Alabama, it's LSU, those type of schools. They should be in that mix once they're in and settled.
Right. So now we're hearing rumors that the SEC is reportedly looking at trying to steal Ohio State, Clemson, Florida State, Michigan. Pete, you're in Big Ten country up there. What do you think is the likelihood, if the SEC were really making a run at an Ohio State or a Michigan, that they could pry them out of the Big Ten and get them to join and really make that super conference?
Slim to none. Just because, we talked about the money already, that Texas and Oklahoma are going to be making a lot more money with the move over. Ohio State and Michigan, that would not be a great financial boost. Probably not enough to make the move. If you're Clemson and Florida State, it's a conversation I think that you may have financially, even though both schools have said in the last week that they have not reached out to the league. So I don't think we're going to get to a point where 10 years down the road, there's one super conference. I think there will be 2. The SEC will certainly be one of them. And then whatever the Big Ten does will probably be the second. But, the idea, I think, of the SEC taking schools away from the Big Ten, I think that, the SEC or the Pac-12, those are the conferences that are vulnerable. The Big Ten, to me, seems as maybe not as stable as the SEC, but certainly it's close.
Right. Zach, do you think there's any truth to those rumors that the SEC is looking to try and snatch those teams out of their respective conferences, being the ACC and the Big Ten?
Sure thing. And whether it were a school like Ohio State or Michigan or someone in the Big Ten, I'm not sure. Could I see ACC? I think that's a bit more likely because we've seen
Mhm.
competition level in the ACC. It's Clemson and everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Imagine Clemson joining in on this momentum and really creating what people are starting to call a mega conference, a super conference, if you will, one of those terms. The SEC is going to want to capitalize on this. Now is probably the perfect time for them to do so. In which case, I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to hear more teams reaching out. But obviously, there would only be a select couple that would actually qualify for the SEC standards.
So at this point, with everything I'm hearing and seeing, I'm starting to call the SEC the LeBron James of college football, being that, they're trying to basically absorb any team that could be competitive and pull them into their footprint. I guess the question is, like, where does it stop? And is it really all about money? Or is there something else? Kind of, obviously money is the driving factor in the majority of cases, but is there something else going on here that's pushing this thing?
I mean, I think it's other than financials. I'm not sure what else the driving force would be. You look at what happened to the Big 12. It's tradition and pageantry and all that stuff that only carries you so far. At some point, you have to pay some bills, and that's where Texas and Oklahoma made the move. But I just sort of look at it as the Big Ten has an established network just like the SEC. It has multiple brand names, certainly not with the depth of the SEC, but it has certainly Ohio State at the top. So they've figured out how to make money up there. And when you know how to make money, you have stability in this era. So that's where, to me, if I was the Big Ten, I would be the aggressor to, who's your Oklahoma and who's your Texas if you're the Big Ten? Is it Washington? Is it Oregon? Is it USC? I'm not really sure, but I think you got to figure out who those programs are, and then if you can leverage that and bring them over, do it. But at this point, I don't see conference expansion as just sort of a numbers game where like everyone wants to get to 16. Well, it's got to be the right 16. It doesn't make any sense to join if you're the Big Ten. You don't want to add Iowa State. They're a competitive football program, but that's not going to make you any more money. So, I think it's sort of where I cover Notre Dame. Notre Dame fits into the mix of a team that you would add both competitively and financially would make sense. But there aren't a lot of other schools like that. Oklahoma and Texas were both like that. Notre Dame is like that. Clemson and Florida State are like that. But there's not an infinite supply of those kinds of teams.
And you look at it too. I mean, this completely ties back into financial and all that type of stuff. But college football expansion too, there for the playoff, with more teams joining into the mix to be in the playoffs every year. Once that is finalized, if that is finalized, now that we have this big thing, the conferences want to add the strongest teams to send as many teams to the playoff as possible. So I totally agree. If the Big Ten is going to do something, they don't want to just add an Iowa State. And Oregon would make a lot more sense. Even Washington would make more sense because that competition is just going to drive the value of the conference up even further.
I hear that. As you mentioned the playoff before you got on, Pete and I were kind of talking offline. And one of the things I was saying is I've long been a proponent of college football playoff expansion. I have no issue with, the 12-team expansion that was just agreed upon. But my thing was always, and this about me, Zach, I didn't want this to turn into an SEC invitational. So I always said, if you're going to expand, let's go ahead and set some guidelines on how the teams are selected and how many teams from where and from whom. But now that's kind of what it's going to look like. If this continues to go the way it's going, you may have 6 teams from the Southeastern Conference making a 12-team playoff, which to me is crazy. But I guess at that point, I wonder, are they going to have to put a freeze on the college football playoff until they figure out how these conference realignments are all going to shake out?
Maybe. It depends on how this whole thing goes and if the process is accelerated or not for these schools to join in on the conference sooner than we anticipated this time. I think that's exactly it. Even though we may not want it to be an SEC invitational, that's what the SEC is gunning for. And again, it all goes back to money. You get 6 teams in the playoffs, and just think about all the money that's going to come in from that. Other conferences obviously are going to want to compete with that. That's why it would make sense for the Big Ten to continue being selective about who they would bring into the conference, because that's really what you're going to have to compete with at this point is an SEC invitational. As much as people may not want it, and even I agree covering the SEC, that's not exactly something that I would look forward to. That's just what it's going to be at this point, because the SEC, right, the conference that can go out and make these type of moves.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay, so now I'm thinking about how does Texas reconcile the Longhorn Network with the existing SEC television deal when they officially enter the conference? Has that been a point of discussion for anyone?
I've seen it thrown around. I mean, I guess the whole thing would have to get thrown out, right? It's not something the SEC is going to want to do.
Right.
But I'm also not the expert on Longhorn Network, so I wish I could offer more, but I can't imagine the SEC would want that.
Pete, knowing what you know about Notre Dame and Peacock and NBC and all that good stuff, you have any thoughts on how Texas kind of and the SEC navigates that situation?
I think you'd have to give it up if you're Texas. I mean, I don't know how the SEC would allow that to continue with the SEC network already being in existence. Maybe, but the money is going to be so great. I mean, that's really one of the great fascinations with Texas to me is like, it's always been a school that sort of behaved like Notre Dame in terms of it had a very independent streak, even though it was in a conference. Like it did what was best for itself, but joining the SEC, like that's not going to be allowed by Greg Sankey. Like that's not what the culture of that league is. It's sort of a strength in numbers, everyone in it together. Texas did not behave that way in the Big 12. So how they come around to that while being in the SEC is sort of a fascinating storyline to me. And I'm not sure anybody really knows what the answer to that is.
On another note, speaking about Texas, they've been down, at least by their standards, for a while now. Texas is one of the top 4 or 5, probably 4 states in terms of Division I college football talent. Pretty much the entire Big 12 recruits heavily out of Texas. So how long do we think it's going to take for Texas to kind of, once they join the SEC, to kind of, rise back up and become competitive? I don't know about whether or not they can win it. They're a long way off from that now, but how long do we see before they become competitive?
I mean, I think they've also got, the lower hand of the two. Obviously, Oklahoma's coming to the playoff pedigree. The odds are kind of, stacked against Texas at that point, considering they're the little brother of the two that's joining the conference that's viewed as the strongest in all of college football. And that being said, they've also just hired a coach, whether or not he's there or not by the time this all starts is another conversation. But they at least hired someone that comes from just coaching at Alabama, has been around that environment from recruiting to development and just program standards as a whole. So you'd think that they're at least on the right track for the timing of all of this, but I can't imagine that it's going to be very easy.
Got it. So we touched a bit earlier on the Big 12, Big 10, possibly looking if they were to expand into a super conference and maybe pull in some heavy hitters from the Pac-12. What I've been reading about recently is that the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are holding some talks in terms of mutual strategic goals in the wake of both of their conferences being down and what's going on in the SEC. Are you guys hearing anything about that? What do you think can happen? I mean, I'm thinking a Big 12, Pac-12 merger probably wouldn't be the worst thing that could happen. It would, likely strengthen both conferences, physically and financially. Kind of where are both of you guys on that?
I'm not sure I quite understand the upside of the Pac-12, Big 12 merger minus Oklahoma and Texas. Like 10 years ago when they were talking about the Pac-16 and Oklahoma and Texas moving west, like that made sense. But the idea of the Pac-12 having a scheduling agreement with schools that Pac-12, like certainly Colorado would be of interest to Big 12 schools and a scheduling agreement. Maybe Arizona State, certainly Utah, but I don't hear a lot of clamoring for like Washington, Texas Tech. So to me that it's probably more of a way to like, all right, everybody in this room, meaning the Pac-12 and the Big 12, what's left of it, like we're staying put, right? Like, okay, like can we sign a deal that is preventative from everyone else leaving? That makes sense to me. But the idea of a scheduling agreement between those two conferences being some great saving grace for those two leagues does not really add up to me.
Yeah, I mean, how beneficial would that be for both conferences at the end of the day? I see the Big 12 getting stronger with the addition of a couple of Pac-12 teams. I don't really see the Pac-12 getting much stronger with the addition of what's left of the Big 12. You know, it would be a lot of numbers, obviously a lot of programs making what I guess should be, from a numbers perspective, the competition for the SEC in terms of having a mega conference or something of the sort. But at the same time, you know, the competition level is not exactly raising that much higher by those two conferences conjoining. You're still going to see the SEC win the majority of those matchups when it comes down to crunch time, when it comes to the playoff, when it comes to out of conference games. One way or another, the SEC still seemingly has the upper hand. So I'd almost wonder if the conferences would rather branch off into different opportunities and just kind of go from there.
Okay. All right. So, Pete, let's go ahead and get you in here. We've done a lot of SEC talk. Let's kind of get to your wheelhouse. Obviously, as we mentioned, Notre Dame is among the biggest and most relevant brands in college football. Among independents, they are the biggest. How does this shakeup affect them going forward, if it does at all?
It certainly puts you on guard if you're Notre Dame, because and I say that in the sense of like if the ACC did lose Clemson or Florida State, which the ACC's television contract and the grant of rights, television revenue that extends out to 2036, like. It would be very difficult for the SEC to pry them away because it would be about 3 or 4 times as expensive as it would be for Texas and Oklahoma. But if you're Notre Dame, you have to be on guard for that. If you're a Notre Dame, you have to look at the ACC's television network and say, like, can we live with this moving forward, being on NBC, but also affiliated with that league. So I think it just sort of puts you on guard. If you're Notre Dame, it's probably a reminder of why you're independent in the first place, because some of the conference realignment dramas don't affect you as much as they do everybody else. But I think overall for Notre Dame, they feel pretty good about it in terms of scheduling moving forward. They have SEC games. They had the home and home with Georgia. You know, Georgia won both. They were both highly rated games. You know, big revenue drivers. They have a home and home with Texas A&M coming up starting in 2024. You know, they have home and home with Clemson or Ohio State and Clemson in 22-23. So it's, you know, we're talking about the Pac-12, Big 12 dynamics. It's like, do those games move the needle? I think Notre Dame games against SEC, Pac-12, ACC, like for the most part, those move the needle and they give Notre Dame an opportunity to prove whether they should be in the playoff or not. You know, certainly beating Clemson last year was that was what got them in over Texas A&M out of the SEC, even though A&M had some good wins. So I think overall in terms of scheduling, they feel good about it. But there's so much uncertainty with the playoff, with conference expansion, that you have to be on guard if you're Notre Dame, so you don't end up in a spot where your Olympic sports don't have a league to play in. You don't have a television deal, and it's hard to make a schedule. I don't think any of that's going to happen, but you have to be prepared for it if you're Notre Dame.
Got it. So you kind of touched on it. Do you think that these things happening or possibly happening at some point forces Notre Dame's hand to become a full-time conference member, or does this situation really make their independence even more attractive and an even more important status to maintain?
For today, it makes them more independent. A year from now or 5 years from now, I can't say. But if they do join a league, they're contractually obligated to join the ACC through 2036. So it's not a situation where the Big Ten and the SEC, there's some deliberation to be made about where you would go. So I think if you're Notre Dame, you feel strong about your position today, but you just have to be on guard that 1 year from now, 5 years from now, that position may change.
Right. So now I'm thinking about one of the other huge lifeblood aspects of college football, and that's recruiting. So the SEC, or at least its top teams for the most part, already dominates on that front. Then, your Bamas, your LSUs, your Georgias, your Floridas, and now you add in Oklahoma. Does this change anything on the recruiting side, whether inside the conference or externally?
Yes. I mean, I cover a team that doesn't really recruit that well in the SEC, just being totally transparent. And I think for teams even like Florida, like this is obviously going to make things a lot tougher, right? Florida.
That's crazy to me. You're in Florida. You know that's a number 1 or 2, depending on the year, state producing Division I talent. There's no reason you should not, be an outstanding recruiting team.
Right. And then Florida's losing out on players, whether it be to Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, Georgia, outside of the state, even though they're the prestigious university within the state of Florida. So now you're welcoming 2 more blue bloods into the equation in Oklahoma, in Texas. Those schools are going to suddenly have much more ground in the state of Florida when it comes to recruiting. So from a Gators perspective, that obviously hurts. On top of that, Florida and a lot of these SEC teams reach their hands into Texas to pull talent. Mm-hmm. How much more appealing is Texas now when all of these prospects say, oh, yeah, I want to go play in the SEC at the next level. I'm willing to leave the state of Texas to go play for the Alabamas, the Floridas, the Georgias, the what have yous. Mm-hmm. Now they've suddenly, even though Texas isn't exactly back, Texas is in the SEC. That's a totally different dynamic for these prospects who want to go play in the best conference in football. Where better to represent than their home state? Or maybe go just up north a little bit and go play for a powerhouse in Oklahoma and still face these SEC teams on a weekly basis. So unless you're Alabama, unless you're Georgia, you're going to be hurt by this from a recruiting perspective. That's just how it's going to be.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely something I was thinking about. I was thinking that for Texas and Oklahoma, it really benefits them getting, further into SEC territory. Like you mentioned, the state of Florida, the state of Georgia, really great high school hotbeds. But then you already have your entrenched recruiting roots in the state of Texas. So this works really well for them. Yeah, it's good stuff. Pete, your thoughts on that in terms of recruiting as well? And, obviously on the Notre Dame side of it, we've seen a verifiable uptick in Notre Dame's recruiting. At one point, they had the number 2 class of 2022. I think that's Penn State now, but we've seen, in the past where you get a lot of 3-star, there's a lot more 4 stars. And I guess depending on the recruiting service, maybe lower level 5-star guys that are committing to Notre Dame now. Where are you on how this conference realignment could affect them recruiting wise?
No, I don't think it's a drastic effect on Notre Dame. Like the SEC is the it conference. Like the majority of players are going to want to play in that conference. So I think it's a boost for Oklahoma. It's a boost for Texas. It hurts A&M, probably hurts Florida. But I think Notre Dame, the schools that they're recruiting against, like I don't see Notre Dame getting into a lot of head-to-head recruiting battles with SEC schools. And I don't think that's going to change. So Notre Dame picked up a 4-star receiver yesterday named Tobias Merriweather from Washington outside State. Portland. Just over the state line. And it was a Notre Dame Stanford battle. They're probably going to get a 4-star receiver who's in the top 100 on Sunday named CJ Williams from outside LA. That's kind of a Notre Dame Stanford USC battle. Notre Dame, when you get Notre Dame recruitments that are heavy SEC leans, those kids usually pick the SEC. And if they do end up at Notre Dame, it's kind of a bit of a culture shock when they get up here. So I don't see that being like the more SEC-ification of college football recruiting. I don't see a huge impact on Notre Dame there in a negative way, but it's going to make a league that was already cutthroat in recruiting even more so. So it's I think from a distance, it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So let's go ahead and kind of get into some specifics in you guys' particular areas of expertise. So, Pete, we left off with you, so we'll just continue. Obviously, I know camp just officially started up in South Bend. What can Notre Dame reasonably expect this season? I mentioned to my buddy John Kennedy, host of the Always Irish Football podcast. Really great podcast. If you're a Notre Dame fan, lots of good stuff. Check that out. But one of the things that he said today was that this year, oddly enough, if you look at Notre Dame's schedule, it's the first time in a long time, and maybe the last time in a long time that Notre Dame will have equal or superior talent on the field to just about everybody they play. And that gives them an opportunity, in his estimation, to win every game. He doesn't expect them to win every game, but they can be in every game. Where are you with that in terms of what we can expect from the Irish this year?
To me, having covering them forever, it feels like kind of a 10-2 style of team. Like, it's got some pretty clear strengths and it's got some real serious weaknesses. However, the schedule that they play is not really a 10-2 schedule. It's more of like, could you squeak out 11-1 or even better? Because they will be more talented than every team that they play. And Notre Dame has been consistent to the point where they have won 24 straight home games, 32 straight games against unranked competition. And if you just extended those streaks to the season, you're guaranteed to go 11-1 because their 4 toughest games are USC, North Carolina, Cincinnati, and Wisconsin. 3 of them are at home and the other one's in Chicago. So they don't play a real hornet's nest of a road game all year. So I could see them sneaking through and sort of being one of those college football playoff contenders that you're not really sure about, and for good reason. But to me, if you look at sort of a typical Notre Dame schedule, this would be a 10-2 team. It would be a New Year's 6 kind of game. And to me, a good season for Notre Dame would be going to a New Year's 6 game and winning it, which is something they have not done since somewhat unbelievably the 1993 football season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's been a lot of roster turnover. You had 9 guys off to the NFL, 9 guys drafted to the NFL, not counting undrafted rookie free agents. You have a revamped O-line that was one of the best in the country last year, a revamped wide receiver core, defensive line, pretty much just about everything. What would you say would be the most impact-making position group this year? Again, we know camp just started, but based on what you've seen so far.
They have to figure out a way to get more out of the receiver position. If you watch SEC football, you watch the college football playoff, there are game breakers all over the field outside the hash marks. Notre Dame did not have any of them last year. They may have some this year. Kevin Austin is a kid out of Florida that is a 4-star prospect.
That's a name we keep hearing.
Big time prospect that has been hurt. He's been suspended, but when he has flashed in practice, you're seeing a guy that shows up regularly in sort of that ESPN 7:30 SEC game that you come home and watch after the Notre Dame game finishes up. So they need more guys like that. They need more guys that look like they could be off SEC rosters. Kevin Austin is one of them. They have some freshmen who could be talented, but they really need Austin to sort of pair with the guys on the roster that are established. They have 2 very, very high-end backs in Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree, and then Michael Mayer is a future first-round tight end. But they got to have somebody outside the numbers to go up and make a play on a one-on-one ball. That's college football in 2021, and Notre Dame was not able to really play that style of ball last year, but they have to figure out a way to play it moving forward. So Kevin Austin, to me, is the guy that really can take Notre Dame from good to very good and maybe beyond that.
Okay, got it. Same question goes for you, Zach. Gators lose their starting QB. I think he's in Tampa Bay backing up Tom Brady now. All-world tight end. He's already making huge plays in practice with Matt Ryan with the Falcons. You lose a big play wide receiver and more. What can we look for from the Gators this year?
Yeah, I think at Florida's Pro Day, they had 16 members of their roster from last year attempting to go to the NFL, on top of guys that transferred out, ran out of eligibility, the whole 9. A lot of roster turnover. It's a very young team. That being said, I look at Florida's schedule, especially in the SEC East. It's not exactly one that is all too daunting other than that major week 3 matchup against Alabama. You look at it and you can see if this team finds a way, to peak, come together very cohesively, which I don't necessarily believe considering how young it will be. But if they can beat Georgia again and they can beat LSU on the road, this is a team that could go 11-1. That being said, I don't really buy that. They lost to LSU at home last year with all the veteran talent that they had.
Right.
I think Georgia is a much better football team than Florida this year, just entering the year. to where I personally think 9-3 is a lot more realistic. Otherwise, what else is their toughest competition on the road? Is it Kentucky? Is it Missouri? Now, Missouri gives up or usually puts up a pretty good fight against Florida on the road. I will give them that. It's not a game that Florida can necessarily sleep on. But I'd still feel comfortable saying the 9-3, maybe 10-2 mark if you can go into Baton Rouge and beat what looks to be Max Johnson at quarterback with Miles Brennan getting injured once again. Florida could squeak into double-digit wins. It's just going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of growth at quarterback. They've proven that they can replace really great weapons in the past couple of years. I mean, they did it the year before when they had 4 receivers go to the NFL. Suddenly it's like, who were those receivers? It's Kadarius Toney pops up, Trayvon Grimes, and of course, Kyle Pitts. But Florida's defense was real bad last year. I think anyone that watched Florida play understands that was one of the worst defenses in Florida history. And it also lost some studs. There are some good players returning like a Kyrie Elam, like a Zach Carter, like a Brenton Cox, but the unit only got younger. It held on to the same defensive coordinator. There wasn't exactly a lot of really inspiring change to make you think this is suddenly going to be one of the better defenses in the SEC once again. So there's a lot stacked up against Florida. It would take, hitting their stride at the right time, probably as soon as they come off what I expect to be a loss against Alabama in order for them to meet their goals. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I totally buy it until I see it.
Right. Okay. So now both you guys, college football experts, obviously, or you wouldn't be here. What other teams can make noise? We know the usual suspects. We know the Ohio State, Clemson. We talked about Alabama just briefly there, Oklahoma, Georgia. What other teams can make noise? And see, this is where, I get excited about the prospect of college football because I love to see, a group of 5 team, a Coastal Carolina pop up or a UCF now with Gus Malzahn, who obviously is going to bring a totally different identity to the Knights. Who can we see maybe primed to make noise and surprise us, or maybe not surprise us, but just is not one of the usual suspects?
I mean, I get to see Cincinnati in person this fall when they come to South Bend. So they play at Indiana, who is like, I realize not a powerhouse, but is a respectable football program now. Yep. And then they come to Notre Dame, who was obviously in the playoff last year. So that, Desmond Ridder, their quarterback, I think they have a lot of talent on defensively. Mm-hmm. They were so good the last few years that Marcus Freeman is now making close to $2 million here at Notre Dame. Luke Fickell, I think, is a very talented head coach who could sort of pick his spot after Cincinnati. So that's, I'm curious to see if they have sort of an 11-1 ability. I mean, they gave Georgia a great game in the postseason last year. So that's sort of one of the more interesting teams. And then I realize USC is like a huge brand name, but it's another Notre Dame opponent. And, that may be more a dramatic, like either it happens now or it's not ever going to happen for Clay Helton. So that's how that unfolds out West, I think is incredibly interesting to me.
USC is a team that USC is a team that always is loaded with talent, loaded with speed at the skill position. I think to your point about Clay Helton, Pete, it's definitely a coaching thing because there's never a lack of talent there. So I can't figure out what's going on with them. But, as a lifelong Notre Dame fan, I'm not upset when they're not good. Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, can I say UCF? I think that the addition of Gus Malzahn is really great. And I think it's a job that he's probably going to ride out until he's ready to retire because he's got all the job security in the world. You've already seen the recruiting take it up, and Notre Dame is, I think, the highest rated one of them all. You've got Big Cat Bryant, who comes with Gus. Kenzie Milton really arrived and started taking over. His protege, Dylan Gabriel, who's been the starter for 2 years, really good at football. I mean, really good. Kick and whip it around. Sling it. Yeah. He's I understand there's definitely a change going on here. I don't think their offense is going to look quite the same because we saw what Gus Malzahn's done over the past couple of years with Auburn. But that being said, I think, I still think that they've also proven that they can flip their wide receiver core. Like I was talking about with Florida earlier, I mean, it seems like UCF has a couple of skilled players drafted every year these past couple of years. They found a way to continue developing talent in there. And now you've got a proven SEC quality head coach running your entire program It's a changing of the guard, obviously. They're not doing things the same way they did with Josh Heupel and with Danny White there. I mean, they're scheduling 2-for-1s now, which is not something that Danny White was really a big fan of. But they've got momentum, they've got confidence, and I think they've got a lot of security based on what they bring back and what they've added to the program this year that they can run for a lot.
So, as you mentioned, UCF, I've definitely been, obviously, I'm down here in Florida. I've been watching them closely. I covered them for the Times Union a couple of years ago when Stanford came to town. That was an awesome game. And, but my question is, Gus Malzahn, as you mentioned, obviously is going to run a totally different style of offense than Josh Heupel did. So I'm wondering, is Dylan Gabriel as good as he is, at least on the collegiate level, is he a fit for that scheme? You're not going to do a lot of option type stuff, quarterback designed runs with Dylan Gabriel. He is a guy, as you mentioned, that, they can get 4 or 5 wide and really sling it all over the field. So I'm wondering, is the personnel that UCF had on hand, are they conducive to a type of scheme that Gus Malzahn runs, or is it going to take a year or two?
I mean, it might take time, but I think with what Dylan Gabriel's been able to prove in the offense that UCF's run is that he can operate at a very fast pace. Mm-hmm. We've seen how that offense operated over the past couple of years. It kind of took college football by storm. Mm-hmm. And I would think that Gus Malzahn's offense is going to slow things down a bit. You've got a third-year starter that started since he was a freshman. He's obviously got the confidence to come in and do whatever he's asked to do. Mm-hmm. But if you're slowing the game down for him, you obviously don't want to slow it down too much. But I think it's something he can do. I think he's also mobile enough to, do some stuff with the quarterback run, focus on the run game. You got to look at what they've got at running back, because I know that that's a bit of a question now. They just lost one of their running backs. I think he's now off the team, or at least temporarily. And they've lost a lot of talent there over the past year or two. So that might be a transition for Gus especially. But I would think that Dylan Gabriel is definitely capable, just based off what he's proven to us so far.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So we touched on UCF, we touched on Cincinnati. That was going to be kind of where I went next, is generally in terms of what group of 5 team is going to be the surprise. I mentioned Coastal Carolina earlier. Boise State is always tough out west. Is there anyone else kind of from the group of 5 ranks that you guys can think of off the top of your head who might, make some noise and possibly be dangerous?
Yeah, those are the teams that they suck up a lot of oxygen, I think, for good reason, between UCF and Cincinnati. In sort of getting down into deeper cuts there. It's like I'm interested in, there's a real deep cut, but like Ball State and the MAC, not for college football playoff purposes or any stretch, mm-hmm. but I think it's a program that sort of established itself with Buffalo as like legitimately good. They have former Notre Dame players of DC, so it's, I think, a school that I think people in my area at least start to track a little bit. But UCF and Cincinnati, those are the ones that have the horses, maybe not over 12 games, but in one game to get a Notre Dame or get a Florida if everything hits right. So those are the ones that I'm most interested to see.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've done a lot of focusing on the SEC since I really started getting into covering college ball, and I've got, an expansion. I can speak to a couple of other teams, but I can't speak to too many group of 5 teams beyond the powerhouses of the group of 5.
Right. I hear you. I think I'm kind of looking forward to see if Coastal Carolina was just a blip last year. I think their quarterback is returning. They played really well. Obviously, they beat a really good BYU team last year. So I'm kind of looking to see what they are able to do, if anything, this year, now that we're kind of back to some semblance of normality. So it should be interesting. And like I said, obviously, Boise State is always tough out west. Anything else you guys wanted to add, kind of that you personally are looking forward to, each of you, before we get out of here?
For me, it's being on a practice field at Notre Dame, because I was not on one at all last season or this spring. So getting back to normal a little bit, doing in-person interviews is something that I will not take for granted when Notre Dame has its first open practice on Saturday morning.
Pete, you're very fortunate because we are still not getting those at Florida, other than one podium session with Dan Mullen and a couple players today. They've decided to go the rest of camp on Zoom. I should have known better, but I still got my hopes up anyway that we'd at least get a 20-minute photo session at the beginning of warmups for practice, roped off to the side of the field, but we're not even getting that. So I guess I'm just looking forward to being back in a press box again. This was a much faster off season than recent ones that I can remember. I mean, obviously last off season was one of the slowest ever, but it's flown by, and that just kind of makes me more excited to get this thing rolling.
And finally, where are you guys both on your final four picks? I would assume it's, as we mentioned, one of the usual suspects, but where are you in terms of who you see in the college football playoff this year?
I mean, until otherwise, you're putting Alabama in there. And I think until otherwise, Clemson will be in there too. I really am fascinated to see how good Oklahoma can be, because they sort of raised the ceiling on where they are. And then I would expect some combination of Georgia or Ohio State to round it out. I mean, to me, those are the five contenders. Georgia and Clemson, they both could make it to play in week one. Clemson doesn't really play anybody else of significance the rest of the season.
Right.
Ohio State's schedule is fine, but they're so loaded that they should handle it from start to finish. And then, Oklahoma has the quarterback advantage over everybody else that they play. So it's, to me, it's those five. But I think Oklahoma, Alabama, Clemson are in for sure. And then you've got a combination of either Georgia or Ohio State probably is the fourth team.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with the five. I would like to see what happens with Ohio State at quarterback, although we've seen them flip quarterbacks pretty well before. Now you've got a CJ Stroud. You've got the hype of a Quinn Ewers coming in and reclassifying, although obviously I wouldn't expect him to play a snap. Right now, and Florida fans will hate me for this, but I really, really like what Georgia's got on paper. I almost think that I'd want to put them in a slight tier above Ohio State just until we see what CJ Stroud has to offer at the quarterback position.
All right, fair enough, gents. I will leave it right there. Thank you again for taking the time to come in and really, give us your expertise on college football. College football is back. It is beautiful to behold. Can't wait for the season to get started. Good luck to you guys. Pete, I hope I see you in Tallahassee at the beginning of the season.
All right. Hope so. Thanks, Bruce. Good to be with you, Zach.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great one.
Thanks. You too.